Welcome back. You found Fritz. Today's video represents the 5th part in the first installment of my debut creative series. In these videos, I break down the process that goes into creating new original music. The focus of this video is all about the mastering process for the first song in this series called To the Moon in a Hurricane. I hope that you find the material in this video useful, and if you do, then please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stuff. And as always, you can find the links to the products that I discuss in this video in the description below. Thank you very much, and let's jump into Logic. Okay, so here we have our mastering session, and this consists of 2 audio files. The first down here is the stereo mixdown from our multi-track session. And the file above it is that Smith song that I've been using to reference the mix to. I pulled this into the mastering session to A/B it against the choices that I make, because this is the sound I'm going after, which is, again, that 80s to early 90s alternative left of the dial style. And for those of you who are new out there, mastering is the final stage in the production where you take the stereo mixdown from your multi-track and bring it up volume-wise to a commercial level, as well as apply some processing that might be necessary, such as EQ, compression, or some spatial processing. So this is that Smith's track, so we can ignore this, and we're going to focus on these tracks here. And I'm actually going to work backwards in order to explain things a little bit more clearly. So the last plugin is just a simple gain plugin that I use to reference the mix in mono. So I just press this button and it folds the stereo mix down to a mono one. And the reason I do that is because I applied some spatial processing earlier, which widens the track and makes it a little bit deeper. And if the mix starts to really sound unclear and confusing while it's in mono, then I know I've gone too far. So I just leave that off unless I'm using it. And then this other bypass plugin is my virtual mix environment or master environment. Again, this is Sienna, made by Acustica. During mastering, you can listen back on a bunch of different speakers. It even has some hi-fi speakers that you can listen back on. But I've pretty much been using the Spitfire and the HOG, which is what I have it on here. And of course, you'll leave it set to off when you mix down. Then above that, I have a plugin that's native to Logic, and it's called AU Roundtrip AAC. And this allows you to listen back to your master as though it's already been encoded to the AAC format, which is what most streaming services use. And here, it shows you what your encoded peaks and intersample peaks will be, because the process of encoding your lossless audio, which would be your 24-bit mix down from your mixing session, it allows you to hear that back as though it's already been encoded to a lossy format, which is AAC or MP3. And the process of doing that is going to raise the volume a little bit. So if I'm mastering a song and it's coming off on the meters that it isn't clipping, meaning it's not causing unwanted distortion, I might be under the false pretense that it's never going to clip. But when I encode at the end to MP3, or when it gets encoded to AAC, it could still potentially clip. So this allows me to monitor that. So for instance, let's go to the loudest part of the song, which is the outro on this song.
Trouble tonight. Whoa. But there's no trouble tonight. Whoa, but there's no trouble tonight.
So this is showing me that I still have 0.8 of 1 decibel left before nasty clipping occurs. However, over here, it's saying that the peak level is negative 1.1, where in reality, after this gets encoded, the peak level will be negative 0.8. So after I've listened back to the track completely and it still says negative 0.8, then I know that I can raise the volume a little bit just to squeeze out some extra headroom. But for now, we're going to leave this off. Above that, I have Isotope's Insight, which is just monitoring the overall loudness of my track. Loudness can become a contentious issue, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to talk about it in context to the song I'm working on, which is not dance music or EDM or any kind of electronic music or modern rock. So I don't need to see an average level of something like -6 Also, I know that most streaming services use a standard average level of -14. So what that means is if I play this entire song and this middle meter reads -14, then I know that when I upload it to Spotify or YouTube or somewhere else, they're not going to artificially turn it down. They're not going to artificially turn down my track. Whereas if it reads -6 or -8, then they're going to turn it down. That's not to say that there's not reasons for mastering your music loud. There are certain genres where that makes sense, and it has a immediacy, an impact to it. So again, I'm going to go to the loudest part of my song. So as you can see, during the loudest section of my song, the average level is at -11.3. This is actually considerably lower than a lot of today's music. Like I said before, you can see it as high as -8, -6 these days. So if I played my entire song back and the average read -11.3, that would actually mean that it would be turned down roughly 2.7 decibels on, I believe, Spotify and YouTube. But since the verses get a little quieter, it actually comes back, and I think -12.5 is my average for the whole song. But the goal is not to master at -14. The goal is to make your song as loud as it can be or it wants to be. And in my case, since I'm going after sort of an 80s sound, it doesn't have to be crazy loud. Okay, so now that I've explained the majority of my metering and my listening environment plugins, I'm going to go back to the beginning to explain the EQ and the spatial processing that I've done on this track. So first, I just have this meter plugin, making sure that I'm providing the right level to the first instance of this plugin, which is called the Howie Weinberg Mastering Console. And this is made by Acustica Audio. And this was created to be an all-in-one mastering solution. And it's supposed to recreate Howie Weinberg's mastering environment. So they went into his actual studio and sampled his gear and broke it down into this plugin. I like the idea, but I wish that they were broken up into individual pieces because I have some other processing going on as well, which made it so that I had to initiate 3 instances of the Howie Weinberg plugin. And in those instances, I had to bypass certain parts of it. So in this middle section here, you can see that this icon is lit up. That means it's active. When I just press on it and turn it off, that means it's bypassed. And you can see that it reads C, E, F, L to represent different parts of the signal chain at Howie's studio. I'll explain these other 2 instances in a moment, but we'll focus on the first one. The only thing I have activated here is the emulation of the digital audio out going into the analog realm at Howie's studio. And this has an emulation of his tape machine on it. And I know in the mix video, I actually had a tape emulation of a master tape. I ended up liking this one a little bit more for this song, so I chose to use this one instead. So you can picture this as just going out into an analog environment and printing your mix to a master tape. So that's all this plugin is emulating. So this would be coming off the tape and going into an EQ. And this EQ is called Aaron. It's made by Acustica as well. And here I'm primarily using the shelves. The high shelf and the low shelf are great. This frequency that I chose represents 10 hertz. So that's way down low. And you can turn it up a little bit without messing things up. I do, however, have a corresponding cut at 130 hertz. Then there was kind of a buildup around 2K, so I just dropped that down 1/2 of 1 decibel. And for those of you who are new, when you're moving 1/2 of 1 decibel on the entire track, that makes a pretty significant difference. These are moves that are typical in a mastering situation. Again, I have a slight 1/2 decibel boost at 7K, and a 1.5 decibel boost at 10K, and that's a shelving band. So from there, we're going out to a bus. And the reason why I have these separated onto different buses is because of the way that Logic allocates CPU usage. So on this bus, I just have another instance of the Howie plugin. And all this is doing is it's taking some of the cloudiness out of the 420 hertz area, and I'm boosting at 100 hertz with a different low shelf. I'm not doing any high passing at all because I took care of that in my mixing process. So after that one, I have this plugin called Celestial, made by Acustica, and most of it is bypassed. You can see these lights indicate whether the plugin sections are on or not. So I have all of them off, except for the stereo manipulation part of it. And here, I'm just widening it a little bit and giving it a little bit more depth. So you widen it with this top part and you give it a little bit more depth down here. And while I'm doing that, I'm checking it in mono. So then from there, as you can see, I have Doro meters scattered throughout this just to make sure that the level isn't rising too much, the average level on the peaks. So after Celestial, I have my final Howie plugin, and this is emulating the trip back into digital. So I know this C light, this is actually the compressor, but I'm not compressing at all because I took care of that in the mix. I'm just using it to bring the volume up a little bit. And I'm using the low pass filter on this one. And that's set to somewhere around 20,000 kilohertz. So that's just calming down the high end a little bit. And then from there, we go to this L. So that's my limiter. And that's actually bringing up the average level of the entire song. And again, I'm not squashing it. I'm not going nuts. An average level of around 11 to 12 on this song is fine with me. And then from there, we have an emulation of us going back into the digital world. And finally, we have our global output. And this one I might raise a little bit because as we saw earlier, the peaks are set to negative 0.8, and that's after encoding. And that's it. Everything else is metering stuff. And of course, my headphone listening environment. So we got our first Howie plugin doing the tape machine. Then we have a stereo EQ. Then we have some more EQ. Then we have our spatial processing. And finally, our limiter. Okay, so in order to do an honest comparison between the affected signal and the dry original signal, I'm going to level match first because the mastered version will be considerably louder. Okay, so I've added some gain with just a gain plugin. So here's everything bypassed, and then this gain plugin got me in the ballpark level-wise to where it was when everything was engaged.
Whoa, but there's no trouble tonight. Whoa.
Okay, so now I'm going to turn the gain plugin off and engage all the mastering plugins.
Whoa, but there's no trouble tonight. Whoa.
So yeah, that was quite a journey from just sitting around fiddling with a bass guitar to where we are now. Just a few EQ moves and some spatial processing, as well as some overall level adjustment, really brought this one home. So with that, we'll wrap up this first installment of my debut creative series, where I do my best to break down the process that goes into creating new original music, from the original spark of an idea to the end result. I've really learned a lot during the making of this series, and I really look forward to making a lot more of them in the future. But if there's a certain aspect about the creative process that you'd like me to focus on more, or if you have a critique or a suggestion, then please leave it in the comment section below. And once again, I really hope that you've gotten something useful out of this video, and if you have, then please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stuff. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.